say a word of your choice. 3 times quiet, 3 times medium, and 3
Make
times
it fuck.
loud. Yeah.
No, not fuck. It would be something like smegma, moist, and douchebag.
Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact, and enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
The atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand.
It is our basic human right to be fuck up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
Hello, this is part 2 of our Colten Boushie coverage. If you want to get the full picture and listen to the full story of what happened and how Colten came to die that night and the injustice surrounding it, make sure to listen to part 1. Otherwise, let's jump right back into part 2 and continue this story.
This should have never happened. It should never happened. Oh, Colten. Kitam mopimtan.
Deep in Saskatchewan's hinterland, tranquility surrounds the grave of Colten Boushie.
I love you.
A serenity that escaped the 22-year-old in life. And Colten's uncle, Alvin Baptiste, is struggling.
My nephew has always been a good young fella, but things like this should never happen. Should never happen to anybody that's out there. Musta, gitam.
Gerald Stanley ended up being acquitted. So obviously, the all-white jury found that his actions were completely reasonable. His awkward left hand and his pointing and his gun discharging and like, whoops, it's a hang fire. Oh shit, magic bullet. So I found this kind of like a statement from Windsor Law at the University of Windsor. So this is, I will just read this verbatim. From Windsor Law, Faculty of Law, a statement on Stanley trial verdict. Gerald Stanley shot Colten Boushie, Red Pheasant First Nation, in the head. The jury found him not guilty. The judge accepted the verdict. The lawyers all played their roles. Some say the jury was the problem. Others may blame the lawyers or jury selection or the judge for failing to properly manage the process. While these may be problems, we think they are symptoms of a much bigger problem, law. It can be good, but it can also be violent. Canada has used law to perpetuate violence against Indigenous peoples and too often protects those who commit acts of violence against Indigenous peoples. Just like racism, law is learned. This means legal education is part of the problem too. We know, and we are working on that. Here's how. As a law school, we strive towards social justice. We take that commitment seriously. While we've been doing our work at Windsor's Faculty of Law for 50 years now, we recognize that Indigenous peoples have been working hard to respond to law's violence since the advent of colonization. We know that small amendments or tinkering with the system are not enough. It has never been enough. It is the architecture of law that must change. This means our system must change to not only recognize but include indigenous laws. A reimagining and reinvention of our legal system is necessary. Change cannot be cosmetic or quick, and it will not be easy. But it will be easier than healing from grief, loss, and anguish that Colten Boushie's family, friends, community, and nation must live with, like so many other indigenous peoples that our system has failed. While recognizing we are not perfect and have more work to do, Windsor's Faculty of Law takes our role in changing legal education seriously. We have a standing Truth and Reconciliation Committee comprised of faculty, students, and staff who help us internally confront our own assumptions and practices while promoting change as we continue to strive to implement the calls of action set out by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We work to support the production of critical scholarship from our faculty and students who will challenge the system. We believe in reshaping legal education. We know it is part of what must change. For starters, we have mandatory courses in Indigenous legal traditions and access to justice, with the hope that when our students become lawyers, they will know something about Indigenous laws and they will not accept status quo. We do not accept status quo. What happened to Colten Boushie and law's response to his murder are tragic, unnecessary, and unacceptable. We stand with Colten Boushie's family. We stand with Red Pheasant First Nation. We stand with Indigenous people. We stand with Indigenous scholars, students, activists, and families who remind all of us our moral responsibilities as guests in the territories of the Three Fires Confederacy to generate change. But we are not only standing, we are also awake, and we publicly commit to doing better by doing what we do really well: research, educate, teach, advocate. These are some of our contributions towards systemic change. We are working on more. What will your contribution be? Because whether you love this land or this country or both, we all have a lot of work to do, and the status quo is not sustainable.
I think it's important.
That's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah, from like a faculty of law.
Yeah,
I think it is encouraging, though, I must say.
Yeah.
Colten Boushie's family and supporters are heading to Ottawa to meet with federal politicians.
We're not going to go there for handshakes.
Chief Kim Jonathan says they're going there to demand more Indigenous representation in the justice system. They want a fresh start to the conversation on reconciliation.
What we don't need is for people just to feel sorry for us. We don't need people to feel sorry and just pity and then leave it there.
The best way would just be to educate people.
Michael Stewart lives in the same rural area as Gerald Stanley, the man found not guilty of murdering Colten Boushie. Stanley says his gun accidentally went off when Boushie and his friends drove onto his farm in August 2016. His defense lawyer argued Stanley felt threatened because he thought the group was stealing. Stewart says he's conflicted about Stanley's acquittal.
I know a man should be able to protect his family, but where do we draw that line?
Indigenous lawyer Eleanor Sunchild says she believes this case can become a catalyst for change.
I think that one of the things that will come out of this trial and this death is taking a really good look at our relationships between our two people.
After the verdict, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau seemed to suggest which side he's on.
Far too many times.
That has riled Conservatives in Ottawa, who are taking to social media to accuse Trudeau and other cabinet ministers of political interference in the justice system. Many of them suggesting it's wholly inappropriate for elected officials to publicly undermine findings of a lawfully delivered verdict. With the Liberals seemingly receptive to Boushie's family, that adds one more debate stirred up by this case.
I think it's important to remember that a lot of people hold the rule of law too rigid next to morality.
Well, it used to be the law to own slaves, and it was illegal to free them, you know?
It used to be legal for you to beat your wife. It used to be, it's still legal.
Holocaust was legal.
Holocaust was legal, yeah.
Yeah, it's still legal to poison the shit out of the environment as long as you do it a certain way. Like, the law is not a reflection of morality. The law is a reflection of the culture we live in. And, I mean, we like to complain about America on here. I mean, we live above like a very dysfunctional country, and it's almost impossible to talk about. That doesn't mean we don't have rotten to the core systemic issues up here in
Canada's
Canada.
garbage too.
Yeah, don't kid yourself in thinking that we're a bunch of Canadians saying, Canada rocks, America sucks. We're rotten too. Mm-hmm. We need to heal too. And this is an example of a colonial mindset being pushed forward in the justice system to let a man go free for killing an Indigenous kid.
Yeah, and a system put in place to protect a certain group of people and doing that job extremely well.
I would like to make a request of our American viewers, of whom you are the majority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's lots of you.
If you were under the impression that Canada was awesome and free from this kind of bigotry and racism, drop us a line, ovfeedback@gmail.com.
Or hit us up on Twitter or whatever.
And tell us what you thought about us prior to hearing this episode, and then how you feel about us after having listened to this episode.
Yeah.
And we will read your comments on the show.
Yeah.
For me, the really interesting part is that he walked free on such shit evidence.
He literally killed someone. Whether or not he meant to, he still killed the guy.
I unwittingly pointed a gun at someone that hang fired and went off and happened to kill them. Now, even the people that try and kill themselves with guns, which is the most lethal way to kill yourself, it still only has an 85% success rate, which is huge compared to like the 3% for pills. Yep. But if 80% of the people who are actually aiming at their head and trying to kill themselves can only do it and 15% can't, and this guy miraculously, accidentally...
In all this tumult and
I think Ood is going to cover this in his section, but I mean, Gerald Stanley, people... critics of Colten Boushie will say, oh, poor Gerald Stanley, he has to live with his legacy for the rest of his life. What about fucking Colten Boushie's family? Fuck you.
Yeah.
Or his friends that have to live with that.
Anyone whose lives he touched are devastated by this, and Gerald Stanley got away. Oh, people, he's stigmatized. Good. Fucking stigmatize a murderer. Yes, please. Fuck him.
And, there was such a conception formed around Gerald. Like, people, again, got the wrong impression about the case and thought that he was, like, the symbol of castle doctrine in Canada. And for those of you who don't know, castle doctrine is the law in some states in the United States where if somebody enters your property, you can use lethal force to get them out. And people were cheering this on, and people just rallied around Gerald.
Yeah. Lots of people, loved him, including members of my own family.
I lost friends over it.
Yep. Yeah, me too.
I did too.
Good riddance to all of my friends who are no longer my friend because of our opinions on this. I just want to say good. Out of my life.
Yeah.
Don't it's like the garbage takes itself out.
Yeah, the trash took itself out. That's what I thought.
And I'm very self-reflective, and I'm very internal, and even though I'm constantly paying attention to my thoughts and emotions, I still catch myself in sexist, racist, bigoted, transphobic moments. And if I'm paying this much attention and I still fuck up, what kind of influence are you having on the world if you think you're totally devoid of anything like that?
Yeah, here.
I don't see color. That is a white culture proverb.
Yeah.
Okay, who's presenting next?
I don't care if you're green, purple, blue, or red.
Yeah, we need to quit with these purple people. The shit, no, and that.
Being someone whose partner is Indigenous, we have had this instance where I was going to pull over and I wanted to look at some flowers in the yard, and he's like, "You can't pull in there." Why can't I? I would normally, I would go in. It was nothing for me to go stop it somewhere and walk up, knock on the door and go, hey, can I have some slips of your flowers?
Yeah.
He's like, okay, leave me out here. Because there's no way he's going to go into somebody else's property.
Yeah. If you want to go into a little deeper exploration of that, go to our white privilege episode somewhere in the 40s. We do go through a good little exercise to help you kind of realize the difference between your upbringing and their upbringing and a whole bunch of stuff. So the aftermath of this. So Gerald Stanley was acquitted, and immediately Saskatchewan became polarized. If you were working in any place that had a lunchroom, that was the talk of the town, and people were forming battle lines on lunch tables. And it was basically two sides. People that thought this is a miscarriage of justice and that for no good reason and through negligence and cruelty, an Indigenous kid was killed. And the other side that thought that Gerald Stanley did what was done to protect his family, and
he stood his ground.
And he was, and the people who agreed with Gerald Stanley, the majority of the time when I talked to them, and the impression I got is it came from very racial lines. Like, you could hear it in their voice when they say, like, he got, like, a native kid out of his yard and all that, and, like...
Or, I live near a reserve, and it's always so shitty, and everyone always steals shit, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, or people saying, I would do the same damn thing. And all
okay, so put a gate on your fucking yard then.
Yeah.
You don't want people to pull into your yard? Build a gate.
Yeah. And
lock your fucking doors.
It's perfectly legal. Get some insurance in case someone steals your shit. That's always a good idea.
Yeah, because shit is replaceable, but like human life is not.
Well, you might have to stop every time you want to pull into your driveway and open a gate, and it's so hard. That's what I was told.
The horror.
Call me a lefty hippie, if you will. And actually, I'd appreciate it if you did. I believe that all human life is sacred.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. No, not preborn human life. Let's be clear about that. I'm very, very fine with abortion. But yeah, any living, breathing human has an inalienable right to life, and which is why I oppose the death penalty. I certainly oppose these fucking revenge killings like Gerald Stanley had done. I think it's fundamentally wrong to kill people for any reason.
Yeah.
What? That's so unreasonable.
And if he felt so bad about it and was going to have to live with this the rest of his life, why didn't he say, yeah, I didn't mean to kill him, but I did kill him.
And I'm super duper sorry.
And I'm super duper sorry about it. Let me serve my time and be done.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
He was, and that's something I'd like to point out. Zero remorse out of Gerald Stanley. Period. End of story. Never once did he say, "I wish this hadn't happened."
He was proud of what he did.
No, he wished they hadn't come on his property. It's their fault.
Yeah.
Okay, Ood, what else have you got?
Well, Saskatchewan was polarized, and so was the rest of Canada, and there was also discussions going on around the world about this. It served as kind of a ground where people can bring up their kind of racial hatred, and people can argue about three main things: colonialism, criminal justice, and the treatment of Indigenous people in Canada.
Yeah.
Now, colonialism relates because we are a colonialistic country. Like, our ancestors, if you're white or if you're non-Indigenous, your ancestors arrived
You're fucking
here
assholes.
at one point. We killed, genocided, butchered, infected,
starved,
like we committed
raped, assimilated,
pillaged.
Killed the culture of.
Like, if you think, like, oh, they're Canadian, so they just arrived and shook hands with the Indigenous people and traded corn and decided to split the land down the middle. No. And even when we came up with treaties, we didn't hold to them. We didn't hold the agreements that we signed. So even when criminal justice, because, like, if you pay attention to this podcast, I have a lot of problems with the criminal justice system, and this is just another hole in it. It allows bigotry and it allows racism through. Like, Lady Justice peeks above her blindfold to see who's sitting on the stand, and that's not how justice should be done.
Okay, well, the justice system was doing exactly what it was specifically designed by a bunch of white colonial men
to get white
to
people
do.
off.
Yeah, so the justice system did it. The justice system didn't fail.
That's fair.
You know, like it did exactly what it was designed to do.
Yeah, it did what it was designed to do. It just didn't deliver justice.
No, it's just shitty and it needs to be changed.
Yeah. Social media was filled with racist posts. If you were on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, like, it was. If you were from Saskatchewan or Saskatoon or North Battleford, it was filled with this shit.
Yep.
Can I interject briefly?
Feel free.
I don't want to steal your thunder if this is where you're getting.
By all means.
But actually, like the social media posts were so shitty.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was unbelievable. There was some group, some farmers group. They had a secret group, and it was just this.
Oh, where they were raising
shit.
money for Gerald Stanley?
Yeah, and it was just bullshit and more bullshit piled upon top of more bullshit. And actually, it was it caused actually some issues with some members of local community governments. Ben Kautz had actually posted his only mistake was leaving 3 witnesses to this group. And understandably, Kautz kind of, stepped down as, the local town councillor or whatever. But
was he the town councillor of?
Yeah,
I forget.
Now read
Browning, the rural municipality of Browning, and basically like attitudes like that in local rural governments, so
and for every
brazenly publicly shared, under your actual name. That like that is the kind
Should
of
have
shit.
killed 3 more people.
And for every like comment to that nature, how many tens are hiding behind each one of those comments?
Well, and people will agree with that, and how many people are agreeing to those? You look at the Facebook, like it's a fucking echo chamber for these assholes.
Yeah.
And
well, just read between those lines. He's saying, not only am I glad you killed Colten, I think the only mistake you made is not continuing to kill the other 3.
Exactly. And that's just obscene. Like, I'm so angry at this. And I mean, the guy gets off in the sense that he I'll just step down. I'll be racist,
bad.
outside of a public forum, like just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't mean to say that out loud. Sorry.
That was my outside voice.
Yeah, shit.
For more on this story now, I am joined by Robert Inez in our Saskatoon studio. He is an Indigenous Studies professor over at the University of Saskatchewan. Robert, we just heard from a lawyer who says that many of the posts we saw in this Colten Boushie story met the legal test for hate speech. So what's your reaction that there won't be legal consequences for some of those comments and posts that we saw last summer?
Well, I think it's kind of surprising and not surprising at the same time. It's surprising in that the kinds of comments that were made were clearly advocating for killing Indigenous people, celebrating the death of one, and hoping that they had killed the others that were there. And it just seems surprising in that the RCMP hasn't really doesn't really say why it's not pursuing this case. I would think that the RCMP should be able to explain exactly what is hate speech and why these comments don't fit the hate speech crime. But at the same time, it's not surprising because in the way in which the RCMP has really handled the case right from the start, from the initial news release to the way in which when they were bringing him in, Stanley, to the court, they had men on the roof looking like snipers. They brought in Stanley from a different entrance, and in the vehicle, what happened to the vehicle, and so it just seems like the way they have been handling this case is, and the way in which they're not pursuing refusing to pursue these charges with these individuals is also not surprising. It kind of fits in with the kind of perception I think that's out there, and the way in which the RCMP is really dealing with this.
Why do you think they have handled it the way that they have?
Right. So, and I think that when we think about the context in which the comments were made on Facebook, it wasn't just an individual, a random post. This was sort of like a mob mentality that really served to intimidate Indigenous people in the province. And it's really, I'm not really sure why, considering that the court case is coming up soon, that the RCMP wouldn't want to send a message that these kinds of comments and these kinds of attitudes in this province shouldn't be tolerated.
How do you think we could better address online racism? Is there a way to keep people in check? The internet can be a difficult place to police.
It certainly can, and I think when you have a group such as the ones where these comments were made, and when you have the premier even saying, watch out, if you make these comments, you could be charged with hate crime or hate speech, and then the RCMP not doing that. Really, there really is no deterrent for these kinds of crimes. It's really sending the message that these kinds of comments are fall, from the RCMP's perspective, falls within the realms of free speech, and really you are free to express yourself in this manner. And I think that the RCMP should be answering questions about why they're not charging.
Okay, I guess we're into closing arguments.
Yeah, I mean, Boushie's family condemned the ruling, of course. The Assembly of First Nations condemned it. The Sask Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations condemned it. All these organizations came about to condemn this verdict. Like, it wasn't a quiet thing. It wasn't just a rumble of the community. Like, there was actual organizations that put their reputations on the line by going against this case.
Mm-hmm.
The Sask Party government was conspicuously silent.
Yeah.
They had the option to appeal this verdict, and they chose not to.
Yeah.
They're douchebags.
Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall condemned the racist comments, but was silent on the verdict.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as predicted. Yeah, and there was the members of Boushie's family traveled down to Ottawa and visited Trudeau and met with
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, for those of you American listeners.
Yeah. And Trudeau said, as a country, we can and must do better, which is a nice sentiment, but it's kind of weak sauce and doesn't get anything done.
He is in general, weak sauce.
Yeah. Like, those conservatives out there that say that Trudeau sucks, we agree with you, but not for the reasons you think.
Yeah.
Cathy McLeod, a conservative member of parliament, said that comments on the case from government members amounted to political interference. So any member of parliament that had a comment on the case, she said, that's political interference. Don't get involved.
The other notable Saskatchewan government response, in addition to being silent on this verdict, several months after the verdict came down, they put forward a bunch of amendments to trespass laws to strengthen these laws of land ownership and personal property and that kind of thing as well.
Gross.
Kind of like I can't hear anything, but holy shit, my dog is going crazy.
And if people, with those laws, people are going to be even more justified to protect with lethal force.
Well, now that it's happened, and literally nothing happened to him except like his feelings got hurt.
Yeah.
Now more people are going to be like, well, looks like I can shoot people.
Yeah, and now that a hang fire defense has passed, it's in the precedent, you can use that defense.
It was a hang fire.
Makes me sick.
Yeah.
Okay, Ood, do you have anything else?
Yeah, sure. February 10th this year, thousands of people around Canada gathered around in Toronto, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, North Battleford, Saskatoon. They gathered when it was negative 28 Celsius or negative 18 Fahrenheit, and they just wanted to make a statement on how nothing is really being done. They said that there was going to be an investigation into the case, because there's a whole bunch of things that got fucked up in the investigation, like the truck in question that was being investigated, it was left out in the rain.
Oh, yeah.
And evidence was mistreated, mislabeled. It wasn't kept track of the correct way. It didn't have the correct chain of evidence where you can see where the evidence goes from person to person to person. All the evidence in this case was mistreated. And
whoops!
For those of you who listen to the evidence pseudoscience episode, it gets fucked up when you do it correctly, and let alone where you abuse evidence so it's not done correctly.
They did a better job with evidence in Richard Begley's first case that I just listened to today with Corporal
Rawls.
They did a better job with evidence there than these people that are supposed to know shit.
Andrew, what I can tell you is what the Civilian Complaints and Review Commission is going to do. It is the independent federal watchdog that looks at the RCMP and decides whether its conduct was appropriate. And in this case, they've decided there's enough information that they want to conduct their own investigation of the RCMP's investigation, looking at what the RCMP officers who arrived at that farm in remote Saskatchewan, what they did, the way they did it, their procedures, particularly looking at things like the way they gathered evidence, the way they informed the family about his death. So there are a number of things that they will look at. But interestingly, when I look at the terms of reference that this hearing will take place, they're saying whether the investigation was conducted reasonably. Also, whether any RCMP members involved in this matter carried out any form of discrimination on the basis of race or perceived race. That will be information that will be particularly interesting for the family of Colten Boushie to hear, for his mother, his uncle, for the lawyer who helped represent them during this trial. They have argued that the investigation carried out by the RCMP was substandard. They have argued that it should have been better, and they point to specific instances, in fact, that we at CBC have been looking into at the same time as the independent watchdog is now announcing its own investigation.
So has there been any reaction from the RCMP?
The RCMP at this point say they can't comment on any of it because we're still in that appeal period. Gerald Stanley, the man who was accused and found not guilty, we are now in this 30-day period where the Crown could come back and appeal that case or make an application to appeal. But, you know, this is not looking at the trial. It is not looking at the outcome of the trial. It is looking at that investigation. And when I look at the number of things that we have found by bringing some of the evidence presented at trial to outside homicide investigators, they will use words like sloppy, negligent, and unacceptable to describe some of the procedures and practices of the RCMP during this investigation. Just one example, and there are many, but just one example is that Colten Boushie was shot and killed inside a vehicle. His body fell outside of that vehicle. There was a significant amount of blood. But when RCMP officers arrived on the scene, they did not cover that vehicle. They did not protect it. And 44 millimeters of rain fell, washing away a significant amount of blood evidence. Blood spatter experts who we've spoken to say that is unacceptable. They say that it is inconceivable that an officer would not have preserved the crime scene. That's just one example of many that homicide investigators have raised with us.
And we've also heard from the family who say that they were not treated properly when the announcement of Colten Boushie's death was made to them.
We certainly have, and that is one of the things that the CCRC, this watchdog, is looking into, and what in many ways prompted them. Because what happened was when Colten Boushie was shot and killed, according to his mother, who was living on the Red Pheasant Reserve at the time, very remote Saskatchewan, 7 or 8 police cars surrounded the home that she was in. Officers came in, told her her son was dead, while at the same time conducting a search for a man they say may have been inside with a gun. And that's prompted questions from the family, like, if you thought there was a guy in the house with a gun, why didn't you take us outside of the house? Why did you tell us that my son was dead and then immediately leave? Why did you, according to Debbie Baptiste, ask whether I was drunk or not? Why did you have to search for Colten Boushie's dinner in the microwave? So they have a lot of questions, and the CCRC is going to be there in many ways to try to answer it. Their powers, they make recommendations and findings. It goes to the Minister of Public Safety. If the RCMP chooses not to follow them, they have to defend to the government why they aren't.
And this is all, you know, taking place in Saskatchewan at a time where there has been a lot of talk about the racial divide that exists in that province. Just last night in Bigger, there was you know, a discussion that took place, and a lot of it focused on rural property rights, and this has brought up some of those divisions that exist in that province.
And there is little debate amongst those who are involved in this case that the people who were in that car, not all of them necessarily, but at least some of the people who were in that car on the night of this shooting were up to no good. The question, though, is what transpired on the farm? And how was it that Colten Boushie was shot and killed? Gerald Stanley, the man who was accused, who was found not guilty in this case, it was long his explanation that he had a handgun and that it experienced a hang fire. Essentially, he pulled the trigger, nothing happened for several seconds, and while he was almost inside the vehicle that Boushie was in trying to remove the keys, at that point the round exited the chamber, struck Mr. Boushie, and ultimately killed him.
That was like in the olden days.
That was a fun little case.
Ood, are you good?
Oh, yeah, I'm good.
Okay, we'll give final thought to Richard Bigley.
Oh, final thought. Now I feel privileged. Okay, I guess notable.
Andrew White.
Yes.
Yeah.
Notable issues with this case is that this whole magical gun thing, it's terribly unlikely, has been, I guess, we can't drive that home enough. But basically what they ended up doing is, you know, the Crown had their own experts, you know, testifying to try to prosecute him. And then the defense would bring in, you know, Jimmy Joe Bob from, you know, the local gun ownership. And, you know, he's like, yeah, well, one time I had a 1.5 minute hang fire when I was shooting gophers with my 22, you know, 40 years ago kind of thing. You know, so it was like...
Billy Joe from Hafford.
You know, so it's just like... You know, and these guys are getting the same weight in court as, you know, like a firearms expert provided by, you know, by the prosecutors. And, you know, so these guys and their anecdotal, oh yeah, 20 years ago that happened to me, you know, like it just seems really bizarre that somebody who can like scientifically tell you how every piece of that gun works in unison to fire that round versus these guys who just shoot a lot of guns.
Yeah.
To give the same weight is just
well, not to discount guys that shoot a lot of guns, because I mean they know their shit.
But anecdotal evidence,
yeah, anecdotal evidence
versus,
does not hold the same weight as
scientifically
scientifically backed evidence.
Not only that, I have lots of people with guns in my life that they don't just keep them in the sheds out in the back 40 with bullets at the same time. Like anyone who knows anything about guns, you don't store shit like that.
Yeah.
And I guess the other issue was the RCMP was also kind of sloppy and negligent as
they
Ood
took
had
away the
said.
vehicle without fucking processing it.
Well, what happened was it started to rain, and I believe the proper protocol is to tarp the scene and cover it so that the water doesn't wash away evidence, blood, what have you.
Yeah.
And basically, they just didn't do that. They just let the shit happen, and if evidence disappears, my bad.
I can't imagine why they did that.
Yeah, so the evidence that a lot of the experts had to rely on were photographs taken by the RCMP of the scene because the blood had been washed away before they could do any sort of analysis to it. A lot of them, and it drew a lot of criticism from, experts, who study homicides, who study, blood spatter and stuff like that, and investigate crimes and, were former cops and that sort of thing. A lot of them said that this was just really sloppy work that they were doing. The trial was also kind of bizarre because in Canadian law, in this particular case, it's not Colten or Colten's family versus Gerald Stanley. It's the government versus Gerald Stanley.
Yep.
And therefore, Colten's family, Colten's friends, anybody involved with that, basically had no legal standing in the trial whatsoever.
Other than the odd victim impact statement.
Yeah, other than, victim impact statement and witness statements and stuff like that when they're called to stand. It was they had no legal standing in this whatsoever. And, so that's another thing. One time when they were, I believe it was Stanley who was testifying, one of the people watching the trial held up an eagle feather while he was testifying, which is a symbol of truth and honesty amongst the indigenous community. And basically he was told to put that feather down while he was testifying. He was just silently holding up this feather and was told, put that away.
Because somebody in the courtroom didn't like it.
Somebody in the courtroom, somebody in the jury didn't like it.
Oh, boy.
And then I guess other issues that were faced was the night that this happened. Basically, the RCMP came into Colten's home and basically
ransacked
it, harassed his mother, was like, "Are you drunk? What's going on?" And it's like, well, and then they tell her, your son, and your son has been shot, and then she like breaks down as understandably any mother would, and they're like, "Oh, you get a hold of yourself, get yourself together," and it's just like completely tactless. They may as well have been like, "Hey, if your son is still alive, take a step forward." Well, not so fast, Miss Boushie. Yeah. They may as well have done that because it was so shittily handled by the RCMP when they were there. They snooped through the house, opened the microwave, looking what kind of food was like. What the hell do you need to go snooping through somebody's microwave for?
Her kid was just murdered.
Exactly. This is just fucking nonsense coming from the...
Can you imagine this happened to a Caucasian house in the suburbs?
No.
Can you imagine if I was shot?
Would
that happen to my white family?
Ding dong, hey, your kid's dead. Hey, what are you crying about? By the way, I'm going to tear apart your house. Yeah. Stop crying.
Have you made microwave popcorn lately? Because,
Yeah. That's cool. It's got to double check.
This is absolute, this is what the indigenous people have to deal with. And it's not just this one case. This is what they deal with day in and day out from Canadian government through the justice system, through law enforcement. It's just shit from, A to Z. That's how that works.
Yep. Yeah.
And, I guess if we were to look at perhaps the silver lining that kind of comes out of the case, when the Boushie family had met with a bunch of the politicians in the issue. The government had actually proposed federal changes to the jury selection process.
Yeah.
I'm not certain where they're at with that, but I know that the government was kind of throwing that out. I don't know if it was just like Justin Trudeau trying to like curry public favor, or if there was some sort of genuine intent to try to equalize the justice system. But there was some rumblings about changing to the jury selection process.
I heard rumblings about election reform too. So
yeah,
I have one more thing. Stop putting your thumbs up. Put them down. Thanks. So I read this, like I wasn't going to include it, but I think it's pretty powerful. It was from, in his own words, Senator Murray Sinclair on the Colten Boushie case. So Murray Sinclair was the chief commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And this is what he wrote. Today I grieve for my country. I grieve for a family that has only seen injustice from the moment a farmer with a handgun, why does a farmer need a handgun, killed their son. I grieve for a mother who saw the police raid her house and treat her like a criminal and not the victim she was. I grieve for other mothers with empty arms who are reminded of their own loss at the hands of others and the lack of answers that haunt them still. I grieve for the youth who now see no hope and whose hunger for justice gives rise to anger. I grieve for the children whose lives now have one more jeopardy. I grieve for the elders who have seen this before, and whose wisdom holds no means to get through this evenly. I may grieve for some time, and then again, we have been grieving a long time. This is why we can't just get over it and move on. My country won't let me.
And then for Occultae Veritatis from Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis people, I'm Leon Filger, along with
Sage Murray,
Oud Gallifrey,
and joining us in studio,
Seffi,
and
Richard Bigley.
Good night.
Love you, bye.
There we go, part 2 of our Colten Boushie coverage. There was a major injustice done here, and I sure hope something is done. Anyways, to play us out for the palate cleanser, we have the Bearhead Sisters singing their song Justice for Colten and Tina during a demonstration march on February 25th of 2018. I hope you enjoy.
Hello, occultists. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the show. With the after show, my name is Leon Filger, along with
Dave Murray,
Ood Gallifrey,
and Richard Bigley.
Okay, so we've got an email, and I'm really excited about it. I haven't read it yet, so we're going to read it all together. This is from Marshall Suduko. I'm sorry, man. Or woman, or neither. Subject is Vince Lee episode. Hi, guys. I recently became a regular listener of your podcast, and I really enjoy the wide variety of topics you cover. Well, thank you. I also like the style of your presentation, so please keep the good content coming. We will.
Mm-hmm.
I just listened to the Vince Lee episode, and I wish that you would have dived deeper into the topic as a whole and focused on all aspects of the crime, including the Canadian justice system, Vince Lee's background, and the victim and his family. Although it's difficult to prove 100%, I agree Vince Lee is not responsible due to his mental illness, but I absolutely disagree with him being released unsupervised or not mandated to prove that he's taking his meds, especially after the gruesome crime he committed.
Okay.
I respectfully disagree. I wish that Tim's family's point of view was discussed, as they went through a lot, and I can't imagine how they feel knowing the person that killed Tim is walking around unchecked. Well, he's not. I feel like some people focus more on Vince Lee as the victim due to his illness rather than the person whose life he took. I disagree with that. Regardless of our difference in opinion on this one, keep doing the great job. Shout out from Edmonton.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Very good.
Awesome.
This is the most consistent thing I see people disagree with us on. Like, not disagree directly with us, but whenever I see Vince Lee being brought up, it's always majority opinions against the one we have. And I see it as one life is already ruined, like one person is already dead, and we have a man who has gone through treatment, who has done the things he needs to earn his freedom, and why would we want to make two tragedies where one already exists?
And statistically, he's less likely to reoffend than a new offender. I mean, he's got schizophrenia, but he's in treatment. That's far different than someone who's not been diagnosed, who's just newly emergent schizophrenia, who hasn't been treated and has the same risk of offending. Right. So, I mean, as far as Vince Lee's risk to society, it's less than any other person's risk to society because his risk has already been established and negated.
Yeah. I mean, it's do you want to have a society where there can be some, like, reparativeness and you can re-enter and you can learn things? Or do you want to have a society where if you happen to make a mistake or you happen to have a mental lapse or you happen to be under the effects of a mental illness, then you have to be locked up until the end of your life? That's not the kind of society that I would encourage or want to live in.
And not to negate the pain that Tim's family experienced, like the victim's family.
Certainly not, but not criminally responsible is not criminally responsible.
Right.
And I mean, I do think that there's a certain level in our justice system where one cannot be liable for what they have no control over.
Yeah.
You know, so if you don't know and this happens, you know, like, and like really think about it, like this could literally happen to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you could, you know, just happen to find yourself on that end of, you know, of the situation. And I mean, not to like scare people or cause, you know, any further stigma, but it's something that can lay dormant in people for a good long time until it flares up. And I mean, it's an unfortunate circumstance, but at the same time, you have no control over it. And therefore it would be, you know, it'd be wrong to hold somebody, you know, liable for something that they really cannot control.
And let's also remember that people with schizophrenia are far more likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine if you disagree with us. Feel free to write in. We'll read it. We'll respond to it and all that. Like, we really want to have a two-way discussion going, but I think all of us are pretty hard set on having Vince be free.
Yeah.
Like, especially since all of us are affected by different levels of mental illness and different types of mental illness, and we know exactly what it's like to be outside your normal range of action due to your mental illness.
Okay, for that after show, I'm Leon Filger.
Sadie Murray.
Ood Gallifrey.
And Richard Bigley.
Love you, bye.
Good night.